Hi everyone, and welcome to my 12 journals of 2016, and this is most definitely inspired by Tim Holtz's 12 tags of 2016. Tim changed his tags up a little bit this year, and he's mixing and matching techniques that he showed you on previous tags and bringing them together to create an entirely different look and a new tag to you each month this year. I've got a lot of tags by about this point, so I decided I wanted to change it up too. So I'm still going to use the techniques that Tim brings us each month, but I'm going to turn them into a journal page rather than a tag. And each of my journal pages, you will see, will join together to form, by the end of the year, a lovely book and chip through the creativity inspired by the 12 tags of 2016, but in journal form. So I really hope that you're going to like this series of videos, and obviously this is January's page. So this is Tim's tag for this month of January, and I am running a little bit behind, so I'll be posting this video in February, but I have already done February's journal, so they'll come pretty close together as I launch them on my YouTube channel. I'll always leave you Tim Holtz's link down below so you can see exactly where he started and the techniques that he showed us, but these are the tags that were inspired by his initial techniques. So there was the metal technique, which was the tag that I've just shown you, and then I'm just going to rifle through here for this tag, which was inspired by his chalkboard technique, and mine did turn out a little bit different to his because I added a little bit of colour, but I think you can still see I've got that chalkboard effect. So today we're combining the chalkboard finish with the sort of embossed metal technique that you highlight with a little bit of black paint. So all the dimensions for this journal will be given on my blog, so you'll see them listed on the blog post that goes with this page, but I'll also give them as I go along creating this journal. So I'm starting out with a cream page today. It measures 10¼ inches by 7 inches. So at the moment it's in the landscape position, and I'm going to score it at 5 inches, and then I'm going to fold along that score line. Now each of the pages is going to have a gusset, and the reason I am creating this little gusset is because I want to be able to add dimension to my pages. So you can see here I'm just making that first fold and making sure that I get a good fold with my bone folder. The gusset will act as the place that I'm going to tie these pages into my journal, and also will give me the ability to be able to add lots of lovely dimension to each of my journal pages. So I flip the page round, again I'm scoring at 5 inches, and then I'm going to fold along that second score line to create a little gusset. It's a little bit fiddly, but I found the easiest way to do it was scoring once, folding, and then rotating the card and scoring again. And you can see that's just given me a 1/4 inch gusset in the middle of the journal page, which will allow me to add dimension should I want to, with embellishments and things, because tags, obviously they're freestanding, they don't need you to add any allowance for dimension. So I've got a little bit of leeway here as I make the page, and also to be able to use that gusset to tie the page at the end of the year into a gorgeous journal. And because of the technique that I'm going to be using this time, which is to create a chalkboard effect, I am making sure that this page is covered with gesso, just to give it a little bit more body and to stop too much of that paint soaking into the page. And I always find that using gesso gives me this little bit of strength in the paper that I'm using. So I'm just going to coat both sides of this journal page with the gesso and dry in between the coats. So I'm going to have 2 coats on each side in total, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my journal. So I've decided I'm going to follow the 2 techniques that Tim brings together each month from tags of old to create a tag for 2016, and instead of using tags, I'm going to be creating journal pages. Each of my journal pages will be inspired by what Tim has done, but it will also be inspired by my year. So either it will be that month has reminded me of something that's happened in my life before, or something that currently happened in that month. So I'm also going to create a tag, which this project is perfect for, that sits in between my journal pages, which will have some kind of memory or either of the year or of years gone by. And that way this journal is really going to be a personal journey of my art and of the things that happen to me in my life. If you know me and you know my videos, you know I do take a lot of time with these creations of my lovely Tim Holtz tags, and to be honest, my journal pages are going to be no different. They are going to be sort of me time when I can sit and really have a play with the inspiration that I've been given by Tim. And it's always nice to do that, to start with inspiration. We do that every day with all the things that we look at on things like Pinterest and on YouTube videos, on blogs. So it's nice to have a prompt, but it always takes you on a different journey every time. Now I'm using some chalkboard paint on top of my gesso here, and I'm going to cover the journal page with 2 coats of that lovely chalky finish. Now this paint, you can see here, I seem to be getting some spotting, and I worked out what that was. I hadn't given it a good stir, and therefore it's just splitting a little bit as it sits on top of that gesso. I work it out, and I will correct it in the second coat. But as you see here, every accident that you have does have a purpose, and I did realise that perhaps if I use this again in the future, it makes a lovely starry background. So this is a chalkboard paint by Faber-Castell, and I'm just covering the page completely with the chalkboard paint and giving myself a good base. So I'm going to dry that layer and repeat with a second coat. This time, as you can see, I've given that paint a good old stir, and I'm managing to cover all those little spots that I got earlier. So I'm going to bring you a technique that I have shown you before in the spirit of these sets of journals and tags, and I'm going to show you how to transfer this image onto the chalk background, or the chalkboard background. And I'm going to be using a pastel pencil to do this. This is by Faber-Castell. It's a white pencil, and because I'm going for white chalk on a black chalkboard, this is going to work really well as a transfer technique, as well as just adding to that chalky technique, or that chalky look, should I say. Now this was a photograph, one of my favourite photographs of my 2 sons when my youngest was about 5, and Damien, his big brother, is giving him a big hug. And I really like this photograph, so I'm going to be using this because this year Damien came back and I got another lovely photograph of my 2 boys all grown up, and I am going to be using that one on my tag. So the first thing I'm doing is something that we used to do when we were tracing, which is completely cover my image with a layer of that white pastel pencil. So take your time, because the better the coverage, the better the image you'll get when you flip this over and trace around your image. Now this image was created in Photoshop. I took the photograph that I had into Photoshop and I used a filter called Stamp. So if anybody has Photoshop, you can do that, but I'm pretty sure that with other packages that you have, you'll be able to do a similar thing by changing your photograph into some sort of line art with the filters that that package might have. Failing that, you can carefully trace around a normal photograph, but this just made it a little bit easier to get the line work that I wanted. I wanted it to look like I was brilliant and that I'd sketched it myself. And then you need to decide where to position your image, and I'm just trying to make sure that the gusset does not go over anyone's face. The sort of centre section of this page, I don't want it to interfere with the faces of my sons, so I'm keeping the image over to one side. I'm imagining that I can see all the lines of the hair on Damien's head at the moment, and then I'm loosely sketching around this image. I've got a hard pencil. In order to do that, you could use a biro if you wanted to, something with a hard tip that's going to give you good definition and transfer that pastel chalk onto the chalkboard page. So take your time, because the neater that you are and the more true to the image you are, the more wonderful you're going to look as an artist when you sketch over this freehand once you have transferred the image. So I know we're not all the world's greatest drawers, and much as I do like to draw and I can draw, I've never been that brilliant at faces. They all seem to go a little bit wonky. And hopefully by using this technique, I'm going to show you a way that you can do this if you're not the world's greatest artist, but you love and want to use images of your family in your artwork. This would be a great way to do that. And here you can see how great that has turned out, but it's going to look even better when we give this an outline with, in my case, I'm going to be using gesso. So I've got a very fine paintbrush and I'm dipping that into my gesso. It could be white acrylic, it could be a fine line white pen. Now the reason that I have actually chosen to use the gesso is because my white pen is really playing up and I need to get myself a new one. But this works really well, as you will see. I'm not going to make you sit through the whole of this process because it did take me a while. After all, I'm using a paintbrush and I'm trying to get it as nicely drawn as I can. You can see I'm going around all of the body areas first, and that is because the piece that I'm most concerned about is getting the faces right. So I'm doing everything else first and leaving the hardest part for me till the last. Now remember, if you get anything wrong and you're not happy with the results, a little bit more of that chalkboard paint once your white gesso is dry, cover over your mistake and then carry on. For instance, if I had one of my lines a little bit too thick, then I'd come back in with my brush again, this time in the chalkboard paint, and just thin the line out a little bit. Now you can see in the hair area, I'm not too worried about following exactly the lines that I lay down with the chalk pastel, and it will just add to that lovely chalkboard finish. So don't worry too much about that. You can see I'm making a little bit of a mistake here with my gesso, so I'm just blotting that off while it's still wet, and I'll go back to that in just a moment. There we go, that's a bit better. I'm also lightly putting in a little bit of shading the areas that I think would have a little bit of shadow. I'm just cross-hatching with a very, very tiny bit of the gesso on my paintbrush, so keeping it nice and light and just adding some shadow where I think that would be. Now you could just have a look at your original photograph for this. Now you can see here where I'm using some more of the black paint, and I'm using it to rub out any smudges that I don't want, and just bringing a little bit of emphasis into areas perhaps where I've got my line work a little bit darker than I would like. So it's a great way to just tidy things up a little bit. And then once I was happy and everything was dry, I just went over the image with a little bit of water on a brush, just to take away that little bit of chalky dust that I had left over from transferring the image with the pastel pencil. Now I'm going to be using that embossed metal technique to add the frame to my artwork. So first of all, I'm just cutting random strips of the double-sided foil that comes from Ranger, and I'm just cutting it randomly into thin and thick strips of different lengths to create a staggered frame on the left and right hand edges of my image. Now I can come a little bit more in on the left hand side because I've got more space on the left hand side, and I'm going a little bit shorter on the right hand side. And then it's time to start sticking these strips down, and I'm just covering that left hand edge with a random selection of strips, and I'm leaving a little bit over on that edge so I can fold it over to create a neat edge on the edge of my journal page. You can see I'm just using random lengths and widths of the tape. So I've finished the right hand side and I'm just finishing off the left hand side. Now I've done this metal embossing technique before, and I always like to add some extra pieces on top of the foil, and you will see that you can make features of those as we go further along with this technique. So the first technique is to put the strips down. You can either do them as I'm doing them in straight lines, or you can do them vertically and horizontally. You could do random shapes. I'm sticking to my oblongs, and you can see here I'm adding some extra little elements, tiny little pieces on top of the original strips. Cut a little heart out there, and I will put one on the opposite side. And then it's time to get embossing, and you'll see if you visit Tim Holtz's site that he did the embossing for this tag using an embossing folder. So he stuck his metal foil onto a piece of card and then ran that through an embossing folder, or put it inside an embossing folder and ran that through something like a Cuttlebug or something similar to emboss the design onto the foil. But I'm doing this by hand. So this was the original technique that we saw Tim do. So you can use a ballpoint pen, preferably one with no ink left in it, or you can use a fine embossing tool. And you can see I'm outlining the edges of the strips first, and then I'm coming back in and giving them some sort of pattern. And this is where you can really play. Sometimes I'm using a little bit of cross hatching, or I'm using the end of a, what are they called? The things you put holes in. Punch. A punch and eyelet setter, and I'm using the end of that to create circles, which I'm then turning into nail heads or screw heads. Also doing a little bit of cross hatching in the pattern that you see on metal plates that you see on the ground sometimes, or perhaps around equipment. I'm using sort of a dotting technique to sort of simulate little rivets in the metal. So I'm thinking sort of metal patterns all the time, but you could quite easily be drawing flowers into your tape. I'm also writing the word brothers, because that's what this page is all about, and then adding a few more of those little screw heads. And then I'm going to repeat all of those processes on the opposite side, and you can see how that texture is really standing out on the silver foil, but the next step will make it stand out even more. And it's going to look a little bit drastic after doing all that lovely work. I mean, you could leave it like that if you wanted to, if you like the look, but I'm going to add my paint. It could be any colour paint, but I'm going to go with the black. I'm keeping things in the same tonal range, and it doesn't really matter if I go onto the chalkboard page, because it won't really show once I show you the final part of this technique. So I'm making sure that paint goes into all the little crevices that we've created, and then I'm going to make sure it's really dry. And then I'm going to take a fine piece of sandpaper and gently rub it over the foil area to reveal all of that texture now filled with the black paint. And this really does give this an industrial feel. Works brilliantly on stuff for boys. You could use this technique on cards, on scrapbook pages, on projects. I've used it on all sorts, and it really is a lovely technique to learn and to try out for yourself. like I said, it doesn't have to be done with black paint, it could be done with any colour paint, white for a slightly more delicate touch, even pink if you want to. At the moment, everything is looking a little bit pristine on the chalky board side of things. So now I'm going to add some chalky finish, as if this chalkboard hasn't been quite cleaned properly. You know the way they look in school in days gone by, before the whiteboard, before you could get the internet on your classroom boards. So this might be actually completely foreign to some of you, but I'm making this now look chalky, look as if it's got chalk dust on it, and I'm doing that with my pastel pencil and smudging it out to make it look like this blackboard has been erased several times before, as well as using the traditional techniques of outlining that you would on your journal pages and creating interest around that frame. So literally drawing around those pieces of silver foil to emphasize that frame further, crossing the lines over because that's a nice finish, something that I quite like, and I'm also using the pastels just to add to the shading already on my little drawings. I'm still thinking that little area that I've got that's got no sketch in, the little free area, is a little bit plain, so I'm just covering up the sketch with the original printout and adding a little bit of splatter again with some gesso. And now it's on with the embellishments, and I've really raided my Tim Holtz stash for this, and I'm going to be using some of his ideology elements to decorate this page. I've got some little stars, I've got some file tabs with some appropriate words. I'm using friends and family, and I'm going to add those to the edge of my page as little file labels. So it's about finding things that further embellish your work, exactly as you would have done had you been making a tag, but this time you're going to put these elements on your page. And this is another reason, like I said, that I created the gussets for this page, so that these embellishments won't impact once the book is finished and the journal is closed. These file tabs come with stickers, and some of them are round and some of them are long like these ones, but they do need a little bit of a pinch, so I'm using some pliers to flatten them slightly and make sure that their adhesive strips are well and truly stuck onto my page. So I'm putting one at the top and one at the side. Now you will see that I'm going to create a pocket on the right hand side of each of my journal pages as I build up this journal, so you will see that I am just paying a little bit of attention to what I do and don't put on this right hand edge. So it was at this point I had a look at my previous tag and realised, do you know what, I think I like a little bit of colour in with this chalkboard technique. So I'm going to add a little bit of subtle red, a sort of dark burgundy colour really, and I'm going to be doing that with some washi tape and with some pastel pencil. I'm adding the pencil and then just smudging it out, so it really is just a hint of colour on Callum's pyjamas. And we won't call it lipstick, but you'll see that I do add a little bit of that colour to their lips as well. It's not lipstick, honestly. You can see I'm just emphasising the shading and also putting some rays on these gorgeous little star embellishments, smudging them out with my finger. I had some Prima metal embellishments as well in my little stash of bits and pieces, and I decided that I wanted to add those as embellishments onto this metal just to bring a little bit of lightness, and I'm going to put some of that red tape underneath each of those sections. So I did stick them down. You can see at the top right hand corner I stuck them down on their own to start with, but I felt they weren't really picked up enough, so I picked them up and added some of the tape underneath, and then I'm sticking them down again with some glossy accents. So as I said before, there are going to be tags in this project, and I am going to be having a photograph that's either taken in the month that I create the page, or a photograph of a memory that I have had inspired by the page or the month that we're in. So this month my son Damien came and visited us. He lives in Spain, and he came to visit us, and I got some lovely photographs of him and his brother, and I've decided to use one taken many years ago on the actual page, and I'm going to include this one of them which was taken this month on the tag itself. So one side of my tag will have a picture of the tag that inspired this layout, so that also gives me the month that I've created the page, and the other side is going to be devoted to a memory. So you can see I'm making my tag to match my page. I haven't gone too much into the detail of this. The actual tag itself measures 5¼ inches by 6 inches, and you can see that I've rounded off the corners, and I'm sort of giving it that chalkboard look with the pastel pencil. I've added a little bit of the metal which I punched to create a reinforcement on the top of the tag. And here's that picture of my lovely boys all grown up. Callum was 17 in February. You can see I'm running a little bit late with these, creating my tag and page in February rather than in January when this challenge started. So each of these tags are going to sit in a pocket that is created as you join the pages together, but you're going to need to add a little bit of lift to fit your tags in between your pages without pushing them apart. So I'm using 1/4 inch strips of card, and I'm creating a U shape. So I'm adding 3 strips to the left and right hand side of the reverse of my page, so working on the right hand half of the page. You'll see that a little bit clearer in just a moment. And I'm stacking up 3 layers of card cut to 1/4 inch strips, and I'm making a U shape, so I'm adding a little piece along the bottom and the left and right hand sides. So I'm creating a little bit of depth so that my tag will sit neatly in between this and what will be February's layout or journal page. And you can see I'm just moving this slightly because it's a little bit high, so I'm just moving it right next to that gusset so that the tag sits neatly with that little bit of washi tape poking out of the edge of the journal page. And of course I wanted to add the date, and I love using these little Tim Holtz letters to put journaling onto things. And although I start out with it on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, I move it to the left-hand side because that file tab covered it up once I put it into the journal page and realised. I added my journaling first with my pastel pencil, then going over it with the gesso. Again, I would have normally done this with a pen, but my white pen has completely given up the ghost, so I need to get to the shops to get another one of those. But in the meantime, this is working quite well. I think you can still read it. Just another idea, if you don't want to put the things on the tag that I have chosen to put on my tag, then you can do whatever you want really. You can create more artwork in your journal, so save your tag for another day and make a completely different piece of artwork that can pop into your journal when we put this all together at the end of the year. Because I've taped these 2 pages together at the same time, well, sort of over a couple of days in succession, because they do take me a while, that is February's inspiration, which is coming your way very shortly. So we've got our page, with its gusset ready to be tied into a journal, and we've got our tag that will sit in the pocket that will be made when we join our first 2 pages together very shortly. No tag is complete without a little tie of ribbon or thread, so I'm adding some sort of off-white ribbon to the top of my tag. At the moment I'm cutting it to a length which I may well cut shorter once I put the journal together, but for now I'm just leaving it at the length that I think I can use at the moment, but it may well get shorter later on, and you can see that's going to sit in between the 2 pages when we join February's page onto January. So I've got my inspiration, my gorgeous photograph. You can see I've added a title, Brothers in Arms, and I am just about finished. I've decided I'm going to turn and take this date over to the other side. Now I was able to do this fairly easily because the washi tape's got a slightly shiny surface, so it meant that I could get these letters off, but I did add a little bit of glue to make sure that they stay in place now that I've restuck them for a second time. So you can see that tag's going to sit in there just like that. You can see that label isn't encroaching on January the 2016 anymore. I added some white highlights with some dimensional paint, and I sort of emphasised the dots on the washi tape with some white gesso and just dabbed the spots with the end of my brush. But that is January complete. So I really hope that you decide either to play along by making tags with Tim Holtz's 12 tags of 2016, or use Tim's inspiration to create journal pages of your own and follow along with me as I make my 12 journals of 2016. So that's it for this video, except to say, if you like this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, the share button, and help me spread the creativity. I look forward to sharing more with you very soon, and don't forget I've got February's page coming your way very shortly. Until then, thank you for watching. Last but not least, a couple of playlists for you. This is for my 2015 tags, and I have to warn you, they're not quite finished, but I will get there eventually, so just watch this space. I've also got a playlist for 2014. This is one of the tags. Again, I used that stamp technique to create this image of myself. And last but not least, if you're looking for somewhere, a great project to store your tags, this uses the metal technique that I showed you, the metal embossing technique, and you can get your workshop with all the instructions you need to make this for yourself over at my Etsy shop.